They say you never see it coming, the second your world splits in two. For Noah reads, that moment came on a late autumn afternoon, just as the sun slid behind the snow-capped Rockies, turning the sky a bruised purple. He'd been in the back seat of his mother's ancient station wagon, sneakers tapping nervously against the floor, counting the telephone poles as they sped down Highway 93. One minute, he was listening to his mother hum along to an old song on the radio, her voice soft and warm, her hands drumming the steering wheel like nothing in the world could ever go wrong. The next, there was a flash of headlights, the screech of tires, metal shrieking and glass exploding. A sound that would chase him for years. He woke up in a white hospital room, wrapped in wires and IVs. The world muffled and far away. His father sat in the corner, face hidden in his hands, and no one ever said it outright. But Noah understood, somewhere deep in the raw wound where his heart used to be, that his mother was gone. The words gathered in his throat, heavy and jagged, but he couldn't make them come out. Not then. Not ever, it seemed. Doctors called it selective mutism. Nurses said, he's just in shock. He'll talk when he's ready. But the days stretched into weeks, and then months. Not a single word passed his lips. He watched the world shrink. Friends stopped calling. Teachers offered sad smiles and extra time for homework he never finished. His father drifted through the house like a ghost, sometimes gentle, sometimes brittle as winter ice, always surrounded by a silence that stung. Noah drew pictures in the margins of his notebooks, wild horses running from a fire, and a boy standing in the smoke, arms reaching out, mouth wide in a scream that never made a sound. Across town, in the scrappy wilds behind the Rustwood Healing Ranch, a different kind of survivor arrived. Sable, they named her, though no one could get close enough to read her name tag even if she'd had one. She was a Mustang, broad-shouldered, dark copper coat, eyes the color of burning whiskey. She'd been part of a wild herd rounded up near the Utah border, torn from everything she knew by men with ropes and trucks and hard, shouting voices. She fought every step. When the animal rescue volunteers tried to soothe her, she reared and kicked, slamming her hooves against the stall doors until her legs bled. No one dared enter her paddock without backup. The ranch's director, a grizzled man named Hank, shook his head and muttered to the staff, "Some animals you can't reach. Some wounds you just can't fix." But Miss Marley, the ranch's therapist, believed otherwise. "She's not mean. She's terrified. There's a difference," she insisted, though even she kept her distance at first, studying Sable from the safety of the fence line. Autumn faded into winter, but Noah's world didn't thaw. Eventually, someone suggested the Rustwood Healing Ranch. It was a place for kids who needed a different kind of help, they told his father. "Animals can reach them when words can't," Miss Marley explained gently on the phone. His father hesitated, wrestling with his own guilt and the cost. But in the end, he packed a small bag for Noah and drove him up the winding mountain road. Neither of them spoke on the way. The car was heavy with unspoken things. Noah arrived at the ranch on a morning so cold his breath clouded in the air. Pine trees ringed the property, snow dusting their branches. Horses grazed quietly behind sturdy fences, their warm breath steaming in the sunlight. The barn was red and sprawling, and the smell of hay and leather made something loosen in his chest, just a little. He met Miss Marley first, a woman with kind eyes, a tangle of silver-streaked hair, and a patience that didn't seem forced. She didn't ask him to talk. She simply walked him around the ranch, showing him where the chickens laid their eggs, where the goats would nudge your hand for treats. When they reached the horse barn, he saw her, Sable, head high and nostrils flared, pacing her paddock with restless energy. Beautiful, isn't she? Miss Marley murmured. But she doesn't let anyone get close. Not yet. Noah felt an odd pull, like looking in a mirror that showed more than your reflection. He stood at the fence, silent, watching her toss her mane, eyes wide and mistrustful. She's not here because she's bad, Miss Marley continued softly. She's here because someone hurt her, and now she's just trying to survive. Sound familiar? She didn't expect an answer. She just squeezed his shoulder, then left him alone at the fence. Days fell into a rhythm. In the mornings, Noah joined the other kids for breakfast. Oatmeal, fruit, scrambled eggs. He listened to their chatter, but never joined in. After chores, the staff encouraged everyone to spend time with the animals. Some kids gravitated to the goats or the barn cats. Noah returned, always, to Sable's paddock. At first, she ignored him. Then, slowly, she watched him. He never tried to touch her or call her name. He just sat on the fence rail, legs dangling, sometimes sketching in his notebook. Sable circled closer, ears flicking. He learned her moods, the way her tail lashed when she was nervous, how her left ear twitched when she was curious. One day, he accidentally dropped his glove into the dust. He didn't dare move, but Sable patted over, nosed the glove, and nudged it back through the fence with surprising gentleness. Noah's breath caught. He reached out, barely brushing her nose with his fingertips. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. She didn't flinch. He didn't speak. But something passed between them, a fragile, silent understanding. From the barn window, Miss Marley watched. Her breath caught in her throat. She saw what no one else had managed in months. A boy, broken but brave, and a Mustang, fierce but gentle, reaching across the gulf of their pain. It was only the beginning. But in that silent, snow-bright morning, a door had opened. A spark flaring in the darkness, stubborn and impossible to ignore. Mornings at Rustwood Ranch were cold, but alive with possibility. Each one a blank page for the kids and animals learning, step by tentative step, how to trust again. For Noah, every sunrise meant another chance to sit by Sable's paddock, another opportunity to breathe the crisp mountain air and let silence say what he could not. Most of the other children at the ranch had started to find their way, some through chattering laughter as they chased goats in the yard, others through art classes, therapy sessions, or quiet conversations with staff. But Noah stayed on the edges, shadow-like, content to watch and listen. His notebook and pencils his only companions. But Sable was different. She too lived on the edge of things. Each day, she paced the paddock, head high and muscles tense, never letting anyone come too close. The staff respected her boundaries, murmuring about unbondable horses in the break room and jotting warnings on her stable card. Sable had bucked 2 ranch hands, and even Hank, the toughest old cowboy around, had thrown up his hands and said, "She's wild as a prairie storm. Might be best to let her be." Still, every afternoon after chores, Noah made his way to her fence. He settled on the top rail, notebook in his lap, boots swinging, face tilted to the pale winter sun. He drew everything he saw, shadows stretching across the corral, the way Sable's mane caught the light, the clouds rising and falling in the distance. Sometimes he simply sat, the quiet between him and Sable deep but not uncomfortable. One day, as snow flurries danced in the air, a group of volunteers arrived with treats and tools, ready to try their hand at winning Sable's trust. They called to her, coaxing with apples and sugar cubes, but Sable pinned her ears and turned her back, every muscle rigid. When a boy named Tyler, new to the ranch, stepped a little too close with a halter, Sable snorted, spun away, and kicked dirt at his feet. The staff pulled Tyler back, shaking their heads. "She's hopeless," one of the volunteers whispered, not realizing Noah was standing nearby. Noah watched the scene unfold, feeling an unexpected heat rise in his chest. He saw the way Sable's eyes widened, saw the panic in her every movement. It reminded him of the hospital, of bright lights and strangers leaning over him, asking him questions he couldn't answer, poking and prodding for a reaction that wouldn't come. Sable wasn't hopeless. She was just afraid, like him. Later that afternoon, when the paddock was quiet, Noah returned, tucking himself onto his usual perch on the fence. Sable stood in the far corner, her breath rising in quick puffs. Noah didn't move, just opened his notebook and started a new sketch. Sable alone and proud, the fence a thin line between them. As he drew, the cold bit through his gloves, numbing his fingers. He fumbled, and one glove slipped through the slats, falling softly to the dirt inside Sable's paddock. Noah froze. For a moment, he debated whether to climb down and fetch it, but he hesitated, knowing it would only startle her. Instead, he watched, heart pounding, as Sable slowly turned toward the glove. She approached it with the wary curiosity of a wild thing. She lowered her head, sniffed it, and then, very gently, nosed the glove across the ground. Inch by inch, she pushed it back through the fence until it rested beneath Noah's dangling feet. Noah stared in disbelief, barely breathing. His fingers trembled as he reached down, brushing the soft velvet of her nose in the process. Sable stilled. Her eyes met his, amber, alert, unblinking. For one perfect moment, neither of them moved. It was as if the world narrowed to just the two of them, their pain and fear suspended. Noah's heart hammered. He let his hand rest on her nose, warm and alive beneath his touch. Sable didn't shy away. She held still, trusting him in that fragile, precious instant. Noah realized he was smiling, truly smiling, for the first time since the accident. From the barn window, Miss Marley saw everything. She pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide and shining. She had worked with dozens of children, seen miracles and heartbreak. But there was something different about this moment, an electric charge in the air, a silent message that rippled through the barn. Later, Miss Marley jotted a quick note in her journal. Noah touched Sable today. No words, no fear, just trust. Could be the beginning. She decided not to mention it to anyone, afraid that even naming it might break the spell. Afterward, Noah sat on the ground by the fence, his back against the wood, sketchbook open in his lap. Sable stood nearby, quietly grazing. Every so often she glanced over, her ears flicking in his direction, as if she were listening for something only he could say. Noah's drawings changed after that day. He still drew horses, but now they had softer eyes and lowered heads, reaching toward an outstretched hand. Sometimes he drew a boy beside them, his face shadowed but his posture open, hope glowing around him like morning sun. In group therapy, when Miss Marley encouraged everyone to share, Noah still didn't speak, but he handed her his sketches. She studied them, tracing the lines with her finger, understanding what words could not express. At night, Noah lay awake in his bunk, the sounds of the ranch all around him, owls hooting in the distance, horses stamping in their stalls, the wind rattling the old window panes. He replayed the moment with Sable over and over in his mind, letting it anchor him against the tide of grief and loneliness. For the first time, he didn't feel entirely alone. The next morning, he woke before sunrise and hurried to the paddock. Sable was waiting for him at the fence, ears forward, tail swishing softly. Noah smiled, feeling a shy bloom of pride in his chest. He slipped off his glove and offered his hand. Sable sniffed it, then nudged his palm, accepting the silent invitation. Behind them, the ranch slowly came to life. The other kids noticed the change, whispering to each other about how the wild Mustang only lets Noah near. Some were jealous, others just curious, but none dared break the spell. It was as if Noah and Sable had woven their own world out of silence and patience, a world where wounds could begin to heal, not with words, but with the simple courage to stay. And from the barn window, Miss Marley watched, hope kindling quietly in her heart. She understood what so many missed. Sometimes, the first step toward healing isn't speaking. It's being seen. It's being met in your silence, not pushed or prodded, but simply allowed to be. In that space, miracles could happen, quietly, stubbornly, like the first wildflowers cracking through the snow. Noah didn't know it yet, but the spark that had ignited between him and Sable would change everything. Not just for him, but for everyone who witnessed their journey. It was only a beginning, but it was a beginning that mattered. The ranch, for the first time in months, felt a little less haunted and a little more like hope. Noah didn't become the talk of the ranch overnight. Rustwood was a place where stories moved slowly, stitched together by daily chores, muddy boots, and the unspoken rules of kids and animals who'd seen too much. But something shifted after that first touch with Sable. It wasn't just the way Sable lingered by the fence when Noah approached, or the gentle curiosity in her eyes. It was as if, in their shared silence, they had recognized something kindred, a brokenness that didn't need words to be understood. Most mornings, Noah arrived at Sable's paddock before anyone else, a thermos of cocoa warming his hands, the world still blue and quiet before breakfast. He'd greet her with a nod, offering a carrot or just the stillness of his presence. Sable would drift toward him, the tension in her shoulders melting a little more each day. Sometimes she let him stroke her muzzle or comb the knots from her mane with careful, hesitant fingers. These moments grew, not through force but through quiet repetition. Noah showing up, Sable allowing herself to be seen, both of them learning that not all touch had to end in pain. The ranch staff began to notice. Miss Marley watched from a respectful distance, taking notes she never shared with the other adults. She saw how Sable only let Noah come near, how her panic dissolved into wary acceptance when he was close. Hank grumbled about miracles and horse whisperers, but even he softened when he saw the pair together. The other kids whispered and watched too. Some were skeptical, others envious, but most were just fascinated, drawn to the silent conversation unfolding between boy and horse. It wasn't just Sable who changed. Noah began to shift in small, almost imperceptible ways. He moved with a little more confidence, shoulders straighter, steps less hesitant. He still didn't talk, but in group therapy with Miss Marley, he started bringing his sketchbook, sliding it across the circle to her instead of hiding it in his backpack. The sketches grew in detail and complexity. At first, just horses in wild, loose lines. Then Sable, always with those wary amber eyes. And finally, scenes that included himself, sometimes standing at her side, sometimes sitting cross-legged outside her fence, sometimes with just their hands and muzzles reaching for each other across a chasm of white space. The other kids noticed the drawings too. During one session, a girl named Eliza, whose own scars were hidden under long sleeves, pointed at a picture of Sable and asked, "Why does she look sad?" Noah shrugged, but instead of withdrawing, he flipped to another page and traced a line, a single wavering gesture connecting Sable's eyes to a boy's outstretched hand. Eliza didn't push for more. She just nodded, understanding that sometimes sadness was a story all its own. As the days passed, Sable became more attached to Noah's routine. She'd pace the fence until she saw him coming, ears flicking forward, nostrils flaring at the sound of his boots in the gravel. If anyone else tried to enter her paddock, she'd back away, tossing her head and stamping, her body language unmistakable. One afternoon, Tyler, still smarting from Sable's earlier rejection, tried again to get close. He carried a bucket of oats, calling softly. Sable watched him warily, her muscles tensed to flee. As Tyler stepped inside, Sable wheeled away, eyes rolling, almost frantic until Noah appeared at the fence. With just a gentle click of his tongue and an open palm, he coaxed her back, the storm in her gaze calming as she pressed her head against the fence near him. Tyler stormed off, muttering about stupid horses, but the message was clear. Sable's trust belonged to Noah alone. Miss Marley, always thoughtful, started to see a pattern. After therapy one afternoon, she lingered as Noah packed up his things. "She only lets you near," she said softly, her voice almost a question. Noah paused, his hand hovering over his notebook. For a moment he considered walking away, but instead he opened the book to a new page and drew two broken circles, one labeled Noah, the other Sable, then a thin, trembling line connecting them. He handed the book to Miss Marley and met her gaze just for a heartbeat. It wasn't speech, but it was more honest than any words could have been. The ranch continued its rhythm: group meals, chores, riding lessons for those ready, art therapy, and the endless work of tending to animals who needed more patience than most people had. But for Noah, the center of every day was his time with Sable. He fed her in silence, learning her moods as carefully as he had learned to read people's eyes in the hospital. Sometimes after he'd finished grooming her, he'd just sit, back to the fence, letting the afternoon sun warm his face while Sable grazed quietly nearby. In those moments, the ache inside him softened. Not gone, but less sharp, less solitary. Some evenings, as dusk fell and the pine trees threw long shadows across the paddocks, Noah lingered longer than he should have. He watched Sable move, graceful even in her unease, and thought about the things he wished he could say. That he missed his mother so much it hurt to breathe. That his father's distance stung almost as badly as the accident itself. That he was scared he'd never be normal again. He didn't know how to speak those things, but he didn't have to. Sable, in her own way, already knew. One night, as Noah lay in bed, the darkness pressing in from all sides, he reached for his sketchbook instead of hiding under his blanket. He drew Sable, then himself beside her, and for the first time he drew a path between them, a road winding through the mountains, the sky above them clear and bright. He pressed the page flat, holding it like a secret, and felt something loosen in his chest. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just the beginning of a new story, one he could tell without saying a word. And somewhere in the barn, Sable dozed with her head over the fence rail, ears twitching at the sound of the night wind. She dreamed of open spaces, of freedom and fear, and, just maybe, of a boy with gentle hands and a silence that felt a little less lonely every day. Underscore, 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 underscore. Let me know when you're ready for part 4, or if you'd like more dramatic scenes, character depth, or sensory details added in the next section. The next weeks at Rustwood Ranch fell into a gentle pattern for Noah, a rhythm that let him breathe again. Mornings were crisp, with frost sparkling on the grass and horses' breath hanging in silver clouds. The air always seemed to carry a quiet promise of healing, of second chances, of a new day for the wounded and wary. But for Noah and Sable, Every day was about inching forward, testing the boundaries of fear and trust, finding safety in the ordinary. Noah's time with Sable became the anchor of his day. After breakfast, chores, and his quiet sketches in group therapy, he would walk to her paddock, always with a few carrots in his jacket pocket and his old, worn sketchbook under his arm. Each visit followed the same silent ritual. Noah would wait at the fence, patient and still, never rushing her. Sable, in turn, would draw close, stretching her neck over the rails, sniffing his hair, letting him rub the velvet of her nose. Sometimes she'd nudge his shoulder, as if telling him he was late, or stand close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath on his cheek. One late afternoon, with the sun dipping behind the pines and the world painted in golden light, Noah arrived to find Sable standing quietly, her mane tangled from rolling in the mud. For the first time, Noah slipped through the gate and entered the paddock, his heart thudding so loudly he was sure she'd spook. But Sable only flicked her ears and watched him. Slowly, cautiously, Noah lifted the soft brush, holding it out so she could sniff it. Sable blinked, then lowered her head. Trust, he realized, wasn't given all at once. It was 100 small decisions, each one braver than the last. He began brushing her, starting at her shoulder and moving in slow circles, just the way Miss Marley had shown him. Sable closed her eyes, her body relaxing under his gentle touch. As he worked, Noah talked to her, not with words, but with his movements, his calm presence, the steady rhythm of the brush. He'd never felt more present in his own body. With every tangle he worked loose, every bit of dried mud he flicked away. It was as if he was scrubbing away a layer of fear from both of them. When he finished, Sable turned, nuzzling his hand with her soft muzzle, then nudged his chest as if to say, "That's enough for today." Noah laughed, not out loud, but a real, silent laugh that bubbled up inside him. He smiled wide, feeling lightness break through the usual fog. From her vantage point by the barn, Miss Marley watched, her eyes shining. She made a quick note in her file. Noah brushed Sable. Both were relaxed. First genuine smile since intake. Progress isn't always words. She wondered what might happen if the world stopped trying to force Noah to speak, and instead learned to listen to the language he and Sable were writing together, one silent gesture at a time. The next day, something even more remarkable happened. After feeding Sable and cleaning her water trough, Noah unlatched the paddock gate, stepping inside with a lead rope. He hesitated, unsure if he was pushing too far, but Sable waited. With a shaky hand, he clipped the rope to her halter and, after a deep breath, began walking her around the paddock. Step by careful step, Sable followed, their movements slow and deliberate, a dance built on trust, not command. Other kids watched from a distance, their faces pressed to the fence, marveling at how the wild Mustang seemed so gentle, so calm, under Noah's quiet guidance. As they circled, Noah felt a flicker of pride. This was more than anyone else had managed with Sable. Even the staff, even Hank with all his years of experience had never walked her without drama. When he looked up, he saw Miss Marley at the fence, giving him a small thumbs up and a proud grin. For the first time, he didn't look away. Later that week, during a rare sunny afternoon, Noah sat with Sable in the paddock, sketching as she grazed. He drew her in motion, her head tossed, her mane flying, her muscles bunched and released as she trotted and cantered. For the first time, he drew himself in the picture not as a shadow, but as a boy in mid-laugh, chasing her along the fence line. Miss Marley saw the drawing during group and said quietly, "Maybe it's not about getting you to talk, Noah. Maybe it's about letting you be heard." She didn't expect a reply, but Noah gave her a small nod. He understood, more than ever, that being heard could happen in 1,000 different ways. But life at the ranch wasn't without its shadows. Noah's father, Robert, started visiting once a week, driving up in his old sedan, the engine rattling like loose bones. He brought books and awkward questions, always with his phone in one hand, work emails and calls constantly tugging at his attention. Robert's guilt hung over him, heavy and obvious. He blamed himself for the accident, for his wife's absence, for Noah's silence. When he tried to talk to his son, it came out wrong. "Are you eating enough? Is the therapy helping? Do you want to come home?" But Noah never replied, never even looked up. The silence between them was colder than the mountain air. One afternoon, after a short, stiff visit, Robert stood outside the paddock, watching his son walk Sable in slow circles. He saw the ease in Noah's posture, the careful joy that surfaced only when the boy was with the horse. For a moment, Robert's anger and helplessness showed. He turned to Miss Marley. "I don't understand it," he said. "He won't talk to me, won't even look at me, but he acts like a different kid with that animal. I don't know what to do." Miss Marley offered a gentle reply. "Sometimes, Mr. Reeds, healing doesn't follow a timeline or a script. Sometimes it just happens, if you let it." Robert shook his head, but he stayed a while longer, leaning on the fence, watching his son and the Mustang. He saw the way Noah reached for Sable, how she leaned into his touch, and he wondered, maybe for the first time, if he'd been listening for the wrong signs all along. That evening, as the sun vanished behind the Rockies, Noah sat by Sable, sketchbook open. He drew his father, small and distant, on the edge of the page. Then he drew himself, closer to Sable than to the world of grown-ups, but reaching out with a tentative line, a bridge maybe, or just hope in the making. For Noah, every little victory with Sable was a quiet revolution. Every brushstroke, every step they took together, every smile that slipped through the silence was a rebellion against the idea that he was broken forever. He still didn't speak, but now, in the golden light and gentle routine of the ranch, he felt the weight in his chest shift. Lighter, less lonely, more possible. The journey was far from over, but for the first time since the accident, Noah believed he might actually want to finish the ride. Spring crept quietly into the Rockies, washing the world in green and gold. The last of the snow melted from the paddock fence posts, leaving the earth muddy and new. Flowers budded along the winding driveway, and Noah, for the first time in months, didn't flinch at the sight of sunlight glinting through the trees. With every passing day, his routine at Rustwood became more than a refuge. It became his lifeline. Each morning, he'd greet Sable with a carrot, and each afternoon, he'd sketch their story in the pages of his battered notebook. The world beyond the ranch felt far away, safely locked outside the boundaries of pasture and pine. But all that changed the day the lawyers arrived. It started as any other morning. Noah was helping Miss Marley stack hay in the feed room when the ranch director, Hank, appeared in the doorway, his expression tight. He glanced at Noah, then at Miss Marley. "We got some folks from the county office here," he said, voice low. "Need to talk to you, Marley. And, Noah, too." Miss Marley's eyes narrowed. "About what?" "Legal stuff," Hank muttered. "Best you hear it from them." Noah's heart thudded. Legal. The word made his stomach twist, dredging up memories of whispered conversations in hospital hallways and the cold, sterile hush of the courthouse after the accident. Miss Marley must have seen the fear on his face because she offered a reassuring squeeze on his shoulder before leading him toward the main office. Inside, Two people sat stiffly at the conference table, a woman in a sharp navy suit with hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and a man with a thick stack of papers and tired eyes. Noah's father was there too, seated at the end of the table, his jaw clenched, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. His phone was silent for once, face down on the table. The woman stood and extended her hand to Miss Marley. "I'm Assistant District Attorney Jensen. This is Mr. Keating from the Child Advocacy Office." She didn't bother offering her hand to Noah. Instead, she fixed him with an assessing gaze, as if weighing him on some invisible scale. "We're here about the accident that took your mother's life," she said, tone brisk but not unkind. "As you know, the case is still open. New evidence suggests the crash may have been caused by a drunk driver, a trucker who fled the scene. The authorities need a witness statement from Noah." Noah's father shifted in his seat, rubbing his hands together. He hasn't spoken since then. He's not ready." Miss Marley spoke up, voice calm but firm. "Noah's made progress here, but forcing him to relive the trauma, especially if he's not ready, could undo everything." Ada Jensen looked unmoved. "The case hinges on his testimony. The DA's office believes the trucker could be brought to justice, but only if we have Noah's account. We understand he isn't speaking, but there are therapists, specialists in forensic interviewing for children. They'll be able to help. We want to transfer Noah, temporarily, to a center in Denver." Noah's ears rang. Denver. The word thundered in his mind, conjuring up images of sterile white walls, strangers' voices, and a world without Sable. The thought of leaving the ranch, leaving the only place he'd felt safe since the accident, sent a spike of panic through him so sharp he almost gasped. Miss Marley stepped protectively in front of him. "Noah's healing. He's building trust here, not just with the staff, but with Sable. If you take him away, even for a few days, you risk destroying that. Please let us try another way." The lawyer from Child Advocacy finally spoke. "We're not unsympathetic, Miss Marley, but there are victims' rights to consider. The family wants justice. The community wants closure. And Noah, you might be the only one who can help make that happen." He paused, turning toward Noah with a gentler expression. "I know this is scary. No one wants to hurt you. But your voice, when you're ready, could make a difference." Noah stared at his shoes, his hands clenching around the frayed edge of his sketchbook. His chest felt tight, his throat raw with words he couldn't say. The idea of speaking, of using the voice that had abandoned him on the worst day of his life, felt impossible. Yet even as the adults argued, another fear grew louder. If he left, even for a little while, would Sable still trust him when he returned? Or would she decide he'd abandoned her too? After the meeting, Noah bolted. He didn't wait for his father or Miss Marley. He ran, past the barn, past the other children, his feet pounding the gravel path until he reached Sable's paddock. She stood waiting, sensing his distress. He leaned against her fence, chest heaving, blinking back tears. Sable pressed her nose through the rails, brushing his hand. Noah felt the tremor of her breath, the steady heartbeat in her quiet presence. He clung to the fence, desperate for an anchor. For the first time, he felt the ranch slipping away, threatened by something he couldn't fight with silence. That evening, after dinner, Noah sat alone in the barn, Sable's stall dimly lit by a single bulb. The storm of panic still churned inside him. He opened his sketchbook, hands shaking, and began to draw. Not the peaceful scenes of grazing and sunshine he usually favored, but a new image. A truck's headlights blazing, broken glass, his mother's face, and, in the passenger seat, Sable. It didn't make sense. How could a horse be in a car? But it felt true to Noah, as if his fear and Sable's wildness were somehow the same. The lines blurred, his mother's gentle eyes turning into Sable's amber gaze. He drew himself, small and silent, huddled in the corner. He drew shadows of grown-ups with briefcases, looming over him, voices tangled in question marks and exclamation points. Across the page, Sable stood between him and the chaos, head high, unafraid. Later, as he slipped back into bed, Noah heard the voices of staff and his father drifting down the hall, low, urgent, filled with worry and frustration. He didn't need to hear the details to understand what was at stake. If he didn't cooperate, he might lose Sable. If he tried and failed, he might lose himself all over again. That night, as sleep finally claimed him, Noah dreamed of running, barefoot through the forest, the wind whipping at his face, Sable running beside him. They didn't need words. They just needed each other. And in the quiet, safe darkness of the dream, for the first time, Noah heard the faintest echo of his own voice, calling out across the distance. The hope, so fragile, was still there. Maybe it wasn't lost. Maybe it was just waiting for the right moment, the right kind of courage, and the right kind of friend. The next morning at Rustwood, the air was thick with tension. Even the horses seemed restless, stamping, snorting, tossing their manes as if they sensed a storm gathering on the horizon. Staff members moved through their routines with forced cheer, their glances lingering longer than usual on Noah. Whispers rippled down the hallway and out across the paddocks. Would he be taken away? Was this his last week with Sable? Noah felt it all. He felt it in his father's tight voice on the phone, in the cautious way Miss Marley looked at him over her coffee, and in the way Sable pressed closer to the fence each morning, as if trying to anchor him with her quiet presence. The threat of the outside world, courts, deadlines, therapists who didn't know his story, loomed larger than ever. And yet, every time Noah touched Sable's nose or brushed her muddy flank, a tiny part of the panic receded. In her, he found the safety that words and promises from adults could never give. Miss Marley, never one to back down from a fight for her kids, spent the morning on the phone. She paced the gravel drive, boots crunching, voice rising and falling as she argued with lawyers, social workers, and finally, the district attorney herself. "Healing doesn't work on a court schedule," she insisted over and over. "You can't put trauma on a calendar. If you force Noah into this now, you'll break the only progress he's made. Give us a chance to do it differently." In a meeting later that day, Miss Marley sat across from the lawyers, her hands folded tightly on the table. Noah and his father sat side by side, Noah silent, Mr. Reed's worn thin by sleepless nights and worry. The ADA leaned forward, her face impassive. "We're running out of time. If Noah can't provide testimony, the case will be dropped. The driver may never be found." Miss Marley didn't flinch. "What if he can show you what happened, even if he can't tell you? What if he draws it, or acts it out, or finds a way that's safe for him?" She turned to Noah, eyes gentle. "Noah, would you be willing to try?" Noah hesitated, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. But then he thought of Sable, the way she never asked more than he could give, the way she always waited for him to be ready. He nodded, just once. Miss Marley squeezed his shoulder, relief written plain on her face. They set up a quiet afternoon in the art therapy room. No lawyers, no pressure. Just Noah, Miss Marley, and a canvas as large as the memory itself. She brought out paints and pencils, showing him that it was safe to let go, that the story didn't have to come out in words. "Draw what you remember," she said softly. "Anything, everything. We'll be right here." Noah's hands shook as he picked up the brush. He dipped it in blue, then gray, then red. At first, the strokes were wild and jagged, bursts of color crashing across the canvas. He painted the road winding through the mountains, the blur of headlights in the dark, the spinning world of shattered glass and screaming metal. He painted his mother's smile, bright and fleeting, and his own small hands pressed to the window. He painted fear, the kind that claws at your insides and steals your voice. And then, he painted Sable. Not as she really was, but as she lived inside him, wild and unbroken, sitting beside him in the front seat, her copper coat blazing even in the chaos. He painted her reaching for him, a steadying force as the world turned upside down. It didn't make sense, not in the way grown-ups wanted, but it was true in the language of memory and emotion. Sable had become his protector, his witness, the bridge between then and now. As he painted, Miss Marley watched in silence, tears burning in her eyes. She saw how Noah's pain bled into hope, how the story spilled out of him in color and shape. When he finished, the canvas was a map of his soul, raw, honest, and more powerful than any sworn testimony. Later, the legal team returned, expecting disappointment. But Miss Marley stood tall, her voice steady as she presented Noah's painting. This is his account. It's not words, but it's the truth as he knows it. He's shown you the scene, the driver's truck, the fear, the moment everything changed. And look. She pointed to the details, the color of the truck, the shape of the broken guardrail, even the number on the license plate scrawled in the corner in trembling, careful numbers. The ADA stared at the painting, something softening in her gaze. The child advocate spoke quietly. Sometimes art speaks louder than language. We can work with this. Noah's father looked at the painting, seeing it for the first time, not just as a collection of colors, but as the voice his son had fought so hard to share. Tears glistened in his eyes. He reached for Noah's hand but didn't force a hug, didn't say anything at all. It was enough for once just to be there. Outside, the ranch staff spread the word. Noah wouldn't have to leave. He could stay, at least for now. The news rippled through the other kids, sparking quiet celebrations. Tyler high-fived Eliza. Even Hank, usually gruff, cracked a smile and brought out lemonade for everyone. That night, as dusk settled over Rustwood, Noah wandered to Sable's paddock, painting still in hand. He leaned against the fence, heart lighter than it had been in months. Sable nuzzled his shoulder, as if she already knew the storm had passed, at least for today. He slipped into her stall, curling up in the sweet straw, the painting beside him. Sable settled down, her body a warm barrier against the night. For the first time since the accident, Noah let himself cry, tears of fear, relief, and the aching beginnings of hope. Sable stayed with him through it all, never moving away, just breathing with him in the darkness. Miss Marley watched from the barn door, a bittersweet smile on her lips. She understood. Healing isn't loud. It isn't quick or clean or easy. Sometimes it comes in paint, or in the presence of a friend who won't leave when you're broken. Sometimes that's enough. And somewhere, miles away, a judge and a lawyer examined Noah's painting and found a truth they hadn't known how to look for. Sometimes, the most powerful testimony comes not from a voice, but from the courage to let yourself be seen. The Rocky Mountains were famous for storms that swept in without warning. One moment blue skies and sweet pine-scented breezes. The next a wall of angry gray clouds rolling across the ridges. That afternoon, as Noah finished chores and sketched Sable grazing peacefully in her paddock, he felt a strange tension in the air. The horses snorted and tossed their heads, restless and uneasy, as if they could sense what was coming before the first thunder cracked. Noah lingered with Sable longer than usual, brushing her coat until it gleamed and picking bits of hay from her mane. The barn lights flickered. Somewhere down by the river, a coyote howled, sharp and lonely. He felt a shiver pass through him. Sable pressed her muzzle to his shoulder, her amber eyes calm and steady, anchoring him in a way no words could. Then the sky broke open. It started with a distant rumble, but within minutes, the world was swallowed by wind and rain, the temperature plunging as the storm barreled down the valley. The ranch erupted into motion. Kids herded inside, staff racing to secure the barns, doors slamming against the rising gale. Horses whinnied and kicked, hooves striking wood as lightning split the sky. Noah was halfway back to the bunkhouse when he heard the chaos erupt near Sable's paddock. Someone shouted, "Gate's loose!" And then he saw it. Sable, panicked, eyes wild, skidding in the mud as she bolted through the open gate into the storm. For a second, everyone froze, shocked by the sudden violence of her escape. Then the ranch was a blur of shouting voices, flashlights flickering, boots pounding after the runaway Mustang. Miss Marley caught Noah by the arm as he tried to follow. "Noah, you need to stay inside. It's dangerous. Let the staff handle this." Her voice was firm, but her eyes betrayed her fear. Noah hesitated, rain plastering his hair to his forehead, his heart pounding. He looked out into the darkness. He could just make out Sable's form, a copper streak vanishing into the trees at the edge of the pasture. Something snapped inside him. The old, cold terror threatened to freeze him in place. But this time, something else was stronger. The knowledge that Sable was out there, alone and afraid, the same way he had been since the accident. He couldn't leave her. He wouldn't. Before anyone could stop him, Noah tore free from Miss Marley's grip and dashed into the rain, his sneakers slipping in the mud, the wind screaming in his ears. Branches whipped at his arms and face. He stumbled, but he didn't stop. The beam from his small flashlight shook wildly as he followed Sable's hoofprints into the night. The ranch behind him was a swirl of confusion. Voices shouting his name, beams of light arcing through the storm. But out here, beneath the thunder and the trees, all that mattered was finding Sable. His breath came in ragged gasps, his chest burned, but he kept moving, calling on the memory of every quiet hour they'd spent together, every lesson he'd learned about trust and fear. He found her at the edge of a gully, trapped and thrashing, her coat slick with rain, eyes wide with panic. The mud sucked at her legs as she fought to climb out. But every struggle sent her sliding deeper into the ditch. The sight cut through Noah's heart. She looked as lost and small as he had felt in the hospital, surrounded by adults who couldn't understand his fear. Noah slid down the embankment, mud soaking through his jeans. He knew he was supposed to be afraid. He knew he should wait for help. But in that moment, all he saw was a friend who needed him. No words, no barriers, just a shared terror that demanded to be answered. He held up his hands, palms open, just as he had when they first met. Sable stopped for a heartbeat, ears flicking, nostrils flaring. The storm crashed around them, rain pouring down his back, the world reduced to the pulsing drum of thunder and the frantic thud of his own heart. And then, something broke loose. A voice ripped itself from his chest, raw and unfamiliar, as if it belonged to someone else. "Stop!" Noah shouted. The sound cracked the air like lightning. Sable froze. The word hung there, suspended, louder than the thunder, truer than the storm. For a second, the world held its breath. Noah waded closer, his voice shaking but real. "It's okay, Sable, I'm here. I won't let you fall." She looked at him, wild and trembling, and then, slowly, impossibly, she stilled. Noah reached for her halter, fingers numb, voice a whisper now. "Easy, girl. We'll get through this, together." Behind them, flashlights bobbed as staff and volunteers reached the gully, their faces stunned to see the scene before them. The silent boy who'd spoken, the wild Mustang standing calm at his side. Miss Marley's voice, shaking with tears and rain, called out, "Noah, you did it! You found her!" Noah barely heard. All he could feel was Sable's warm breath on his cheek, the soft nickering in her throat, a sound of trust, of relief, of a bond forged in the storm. Staff scrambled to help, looping ropes under Sable's belly, guiding her out of the mud with gentle, urgent hands. She scrambled up the embankment, slipping and sliding, but never taking her eyes off Noah. When she was finally safe, she pressed her muzzle into his chest, her whole body trembling. The ranch buzzed with disbelief as they led the pair back through the rain. Kids watched through the windows, eyes wide, as word spread. Noah had spoken, not just a sound, but a word, a command, a promise, a lifeline. Miss Marley wrapped Noah in a towel, hugging him tight as he shook with cold and adrenaline. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "You spoke, Noah. You found your voice when it mattered." Noah didn't answer, not at first. He looked past her to Sable, who waited patiently at the gate, her sides heaving, her eyes locked on his. He nodded, understanding what only she could know. The voice wasn't something he'd lost forever. It had just needed the right reason, the right friend, the right kind of fear, and the storm to shake it loose. That night, as the thunder faded and the ranch returned to its slow, hopeful quiet, Noah sat beside Sable in her stall. He pressed his forehead to hers, silent tears mixing with the last of the rain on his cheeks. For the first time in a long time, the world didn't feel so big and empty. For the first time, he believed that healing might be loud or quiet, but it would always be real. And above the barn, as the clouds broke and the stars returned, a new story began, one that belonged to both of them. Word of what happened the night of the storm traveled fast through Rustwood Ranch. The next morning, Noah woke to soft sunlight streaming through the bunkhouse window and the quiet, awestruck chatter of the other kids. He lay for a moment, letting the memory play out again in his mind. The wild rush through the rain, Sable's terrified eyes, the single shouted word that had broken the silence gripping his chest for months. The memory felt almost unreal, like a story he'd heard about someone else. But when he swung his legs over the side of the bed and saw the muddy boots at the door, the scratches on his arms, and the distant, familiar whinny of Sable from the paddock, he knew it had all been true. Breakfast that morning felt different. Kids who'd once whispered about the silent boy now looked at Noah with new respect, some with shy admiration. Even Tyler, who had always kept his distance, offered a thumbs up from across the table. Eliza slipped him a folded note. "You were brave, so was Sable." Noah tucked it in his pocket, unsure what to do with the warmth spreading in his chest. After breakfast, Miss Marley found him in the barn, quietly mucking out Sable's stall. She knelt beside him, handing him a fresh brush. "You did something incredible last night," she said, her voice soft but proud. "You found your voice when it mattered most. How are you feeling?" Noah shrugged, unsure of his own answer. But he didn't look away. He finished with the brush and pressed his forehead gently to Sable's, breathing in her warm, grassy scent. For a moment, nothing in the world existed but this, the calm after the storm, the quiet understanding between a boy and a horse. Outside, the sun crept higher, melting away the last traces of mud and rain. The staff decided to keep the day easy, letting everyone recover from the drama of the night before. While the other kids played games and painted, Noah spent the morning in Sable's paddock, walking slow laps with her, talking to her in a low voice that sometimes wavered but never disappeared. The staff watched, amazed. Noah's words weren't always full sentences, sometimes not words at all, but his presence had shifted. The old, closed-off silence was gone, replaced by a fragile openness that brightened his eyes and steadied his hands. After lunch, as the sky turned a brilliant blue, Miss Marley approached Noah with a gentle suggestion. "Would you like to try riding her? Not with reins, not with force. Just see what happens. Sometimes, when we trust, they trust us back." Noah's heart leapt at the idea, a thrill of fear and excitement rolling through him. He remembered his mother's stories about horses, how she used to ride bareback as a girl, feeling the rhythm of the animal beneath her like music. He remembered the fear in Sable's eyes and the trust they'd built, one silent moment at a time. He nodded. The staff gathered quietly along the fence line, a respectful audience for something that felt sacred. Miss Marley helped Noah slip into Sable's paddock, barefoot, the grass still damp from last night's rain. He pressed his hand to Sable's shoulder, asking for permission. Sable stilled, then dipped her head in silent agreement. Carefully, Noah swung his leg over Sable's back, settling onto her broad, warm spine. There was no saddle, no reins, just his hands in her tangled mane and the steady pulse of her breath beneath him. For a moment, they stood together, the whole ranch holding its breath. Noah squeezed his knees, barely a signal. Sable stepped forward, slow and deliberate, carrying him in a gentle circle around the paddock. With each step, Noah felt the last bits of fear melt away, replaced by something deeper than joy, something like freedom. The wind rushed past his ears, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. The earth seemed to move beneath them, but the world felt steady for the first time in months. Staff and kids cheered quietly, their applause filled with awe. Eliza clapped her hands, tears shining in her eyes. Even Hank grinned, muttering, "Now I've seen everything." Miss Marley stood at the gate, hands pressed to her heart. "This is what healing looks like," she whispered to a staffer beside her. "Not control, not obedience, connection." Around and around the paddock, Noah and Sable moved, a single living heartbeat. When Sable stopped, Noah slid from her back, grinning so wide his cheeks ached. Sable nuzzled his face, breathing out a soft, happy snort. He pressed his face to her neck, whispering thanks. That afternoon, as the sun slipped toward the mountains, Noah's father arrived at the ranch. He looked tired, older than he had weeks before. But there was hope in the way he parked, in the way he didn't reach for his phone as he walked across the grass. He stopped at the fence, hands in his pockets, watching as Noah led Sable across the field. For a long time, Robert just stood there, saying nothing, his eyes wide with wonder. He saw the boy he thought he'd lost, alive, whole, laughing. He saw the connection, so simple and profound that words could never explain. When Noah finally looked up and caught his father's eye, neither of them spoke. But Robert stepped through the gate and, for the first time in months, walked out to join his son. They stood together beside Sable, the awkwardness between them replaced by the simple, perfect silence of shared awe. Miss Marley watched from a distance, smiling through tears. She knew, as all true healers do, that the best moments in life often arrive without warning, in the spaces between words, when love and trust are allowed to lead. As dusk settled, the ranch returned to its quiet rhythm. Noah, tired and happy, helped settle Sable in her stall. He brushed her coat, careful and slow, then sat by her side as she drifted into sleep. For the first time since the accident, Noah felt his voice in his chest, not as a burden, but as a gift. He hummed a quiet tune, the same one his mother used to sing on car rides, letting it float out into the night. When he slipped back into the bunkhouse, the other kids didn't bombard him with questions. They just made space for him on the porch, passing him a mug of cocoa and a blanket, letting him sit with them as the stars came out, the silence warm and full of promise. Noah closed his eyes, Sable's warmth still in his bones, and breathed in the truth of the moment. Healing wasn't about being fixed. It was about being found. Rustwood Healing Ranch was never a place built for headlines, but after the storm and the ride, word of Noah and Sable's story began to slip beyond the fences. It started with a single staff member who shared what she'd witnessed. A boy, once silent and haunted, calling out into a storm to save a wild Mustang. A horse feared by all, standing still in the darkness at the sound of one broken voice. News spread, first through the town, then the county, and finally, a journalist from a regional paper called to see if he could visit the ranch and meet the boy and his horse. At first, Miss Marley hesitated. The ranch was supposed to be a sanctuary, not a spectacle, but she also understood that stories, when told with care, could become lanterns for others lost in the dark. She sat with Noah and gently explained that some people wanted to learn about what he and Sable had done together. Not for gossip or praise, but to bring hope to families whose kids were lost in their own silences. Noah thought for a while, then nodded. If their story could help just one kid or one horse find a moment of peace, maybe it was worth it. So the world came knocking on Rustwood's red barn doors, reporters with cameras and notebooks, social workers eager to understand, local therapists asking for advice. The first podcast interview took place in the ranch's kitchen, the interviewer sitting cross-legged on the floor so as not to spook the animals. Noah didn't say much. He wasn't ready for microphones and probing questions, but Miss Marley spoke for both of them, sharing their journey, emphasizing what really mattered. Sable didn't fix Noah, she told the audience, her voice steady. She just stayed with him when he was broken. That was enough. The interviewer pressed for details. How did you know what Noah needed? Was there a special technique, a therapy plan? Miss Marley shook her head. Sometimes healing isn't about pushing someone to talk or act a certain way. Sometimes it's about presence, just showing up day after day, whether the person in pain says a word or not. Sable didn't force Noah to do anything. She let him be himself. In turn, he let her be herself. They healed together, not because one fixed the other, but because they chose not to leave. Rustwood's phones rang off the hook for weeks. A documentary crew from a national streaming service came out, quiet and respectful, filming from a distance as Noah walked Sable in the dawn light, as he brushed her mane with the same careful patience that had changed them both. They interviewed the staff, the other kids, and even Noah's father, whose pride was clear every time he spoke about his son. In one of the final scenes of the documentary, Miss Marley stood by the paddock fence, her voice carrying into the crisp mountain morning. What happened here wasn't magic. It was attention, patience, and respect, given freely, not earned. It was learning that not every wound heals on a schedule. Some things don't get fixed. They just get carried. And if you're lucky, you find someone or some animal willing to help carry the load. Psychologists featured in the film explained that Noah had found a mirror in Sable, a soul as skittish and wounded as his own, a presence that responded not to pressure, but to patience. They spoke of the healing power of connection, the importance of animals in trauma recovery, and how sometimes the smallest breakthroughs, like touching a wild horse's nose or speaking a single word, were more meaningful than any therapy session. Noah, for his part, still didn't speak much in public. But in group therapy, he began to share more of his drawings. He sketched horses of every color and mood, kids standing quietly beside them, and landscapes of open sky and running water. Sometimes his art showed storms, dark clouds, wild wind, fear coiled tight in the air. But always, there was a thread of light running through, a suggestion of hope, of quiet hands reaching out, of wounds slowly closing. The other kids at the ranch changed too. Eliza, inspired by Noah's courage, started bringing her own rescue dog to group, letting others pet him as she told pieces of her story. Tyler, who had once struggled with anger, asked if he could help with the new batch of rescued foals. The adults noticed a ripple effect, a new patience, a gentler way of seeing each other's struggles. Noah's father, Robert, became a regular presence at the ranch, helping Hank repair fences or stack hay, sometimes just sitting beside Noah as he sketched. Their conversations were quiet, sometimes wordless, but slowly, the ice between them began to thaw. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Robert placed a hand on his son's shoulder and said, "You don't have to talk if you're not ready, son. I'm just glad you're here." Noah nodded, feeling something deep inside him finally relax. He realized then that healing didn't mean erasing what had happened, or pretending the pain wasn't real. It meant finding people who wouldn't leave, who would stand beside you in the storm, and let you move at your own pace. Miss Marley reflected on all she'd witnessed. In her journal, she wrote, "Presence is more powerful than words. Sable taught us that. Noah taught us that. Healing isn't a destination. It's a journey you don't have to make alone." As summer approached and the meadows turned gold, Noah found new meaning in the quiet moments. Sometimes he led silent sessions for younger kids, inviting them to sit in Sable's paddock, sketch, or just be still, letting the gentle rhythm of a horse's breath remind them that they were not alone. He didn't always talk, but now he chose when to speak, and he chose when to simply be present. The story of Noah and Sable became more than a miracle at Rustwood. It became a reminder, whispered through every barn, classroom, and living room that heard it. You don't have to be fixed to be loved. You just have to let someone stay with you, brokenness and all. And in the hush of a summer night, with the mountains watching and Sable grazing nearby, Noah felt, maybe for the first time, that he belonged, not just to a story, but to a world that was learning, at last, how to listen. Late summer at Rustwood Healing Ranch brought days so bright the sky seemed endless, and nights so clear the stars felt close enough to touch. The mountains stood silent and watchful, the fields awash in gold, and the animals, too, seemed to bask in a peace that had been hard won. Noah walked these grounds with a new steadiness. He still didn't talk much, but nobody minded anymore. He had become a quiet pillar at the ranch, a boy known not for his silence, but for his unwavering presence and the quiet way he made everyone around him feel a little safer, a little braver. Over the months that followed, Noah slipped into a new rhythm of life. He helped Hank and the staff mend fences, feed the animals, and teach the younger kids how to care for the ranch's residents. He guided newcomers through the gentle rituals of morning chores and slow afternoons, always patient, always observant. Some days he spoke. Some days he didn't. But the kids and the adults, having seen what presence could mean, learned to measure progress by smiles, by laughter, by the lightness in Noah's step as he led Sable through the tall grass. Noah's relationship with his father changed too. They didn't rush things. Instead, Robert learned to match Noah's pace, showing up for Sunday visits, learning how to mend a halter, sharing silent lunches beneath the pine trees. Sometimes the words between them were few, but their moments together grew richer, colored by quiet understanding. One afternoon, as they fixed a loose fence post side by side, Robert looked over and smiled. "You know, I think your mom would have loved it here." Noah nodded, his heart aching and grateful all at once. The silent sessions that Noah led for the new kids became a quiet tradition. He'd gather 2 or 3 at a time, sit with them in Sable's paddock, and encourage them to close their eyes, listen to the horses breathe, and draw whatever they felt. Sometimes a child would cry, or sit frozen, overwhelmed by memories that had no words. Noah would simply stay beside them, not hurrying, not judging, letting their pain have space. Bit by bit, the children learned, just as he had, that healing isn't loud or sudden. It is the steady presence of someone who doesn't give up on you, even when you can't speak. The world beyond Rustwood went on, but Noah's life grew full in small, meaningful ways. The documentary about his journey played on screens across the country, touching strangers' hearts. Letters poured in, parents sharing stories of their own silent children, kids sending hand-drawn horses, artists who'd found new courage to show their work. Miss Marley and the staff shared each note with Noah, who would sometimes write back, sometimes draw a reply, and sometimes simply smile, knowing their story was helping others. One crisp September afternoon, as the leaves turned to fire and gold, Miss Marley joined Noah beneath the big sycamore near the paddock. Sable grazed quietly nearby, her copper coat glowing in the sunlight. "You know," Miss Marley said, "when you first came here, I wasn't sure what would happen. But you taught us all something important. Healing isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about finding people, friends, family, even animals, who'll stay by your side when you're hurting, who'll help you carry what you can't carry alone." Noah looked at her, then at Sable, and nodded. He picked up a stick and drew a simple shape in the dirt, a heart with 2 figures inside, one tall, one four-legged. Miss Marley squeezed his hand, tears bright in her eyes. That evening, the ranch gathered for a quiet celebration. Just the kids, staff, and animals. They sat around a fire, sharing marshmallows and stories. Miss Marley spoke, her voice strong. "Rustwood is a family. Family isn't always blood. It's who shows up and stays, no matter how hard things get." She looked at Noah, and the group followed her gaze. Eliza grinned. Tyler gave a goofy salute. The other children joined in, laughter echoing into the warm night. Later, as the stars blanketed the sky, Noah found himself drawn back to Sable's paddock one last time before bed. He stood quietly at the fence, breathing in the cool air, the sweet smell of hay, the comforting sounds of horses settling in for the night. Sable lifted her head and ambled over, bumping her nose gently against his shoulder. Noah stroked her cheek, letting the silence say what he could not. He took a deep breath, and for the first time he raised his hand and signed "thank you" in American Sign Language. Slow, careful, and full of meaning. Sable watched, blinking, then nuzzled him again, her trust complete. For a long moment, boy and horse stood together under the moonlight, 2 souls joined by something deeper than words. Around them, the world spun on, imperfect, unpredictable, but a little more hopeful for the quiet bonds forged at Rustwood. Noah understood, finally, the truth his journey had revealed. Healing isn't loud. Family isn't always the people you're born to. And love doesn't always arrive with speeches, promises, or even a single word. Sometimes, It is just the quiet, stubborn choice to stay. Through pain, through silence, through every storm. As Noah turned for the bunkhouse, Sable followed him along the fence, head low, eyes gentle. He paused, pressing his palm to her muzzle one last time before stepping away, his heart lighter than it had been in a long, long while. And somewhere deep inside, a voice, soft but certain, reminded him, presence is greater than words. He smiled into the darkness, knowing he would carry that lesson always, and perhaps, in ways both big and small, help others do the same.